So Ava is an application for deaf and hard of hearing people to better understand conversations around them. This can be a multi-person conversation or a one-on-one situation. Basically what we do is we connect people's devices, so smartphones, tablets, laptops, anything that carries a microphone, to one another, and then we can caption all the audio from the conversation and translate it to text. So for the deaf or hard of hearing person, they can then see who's speaking and what's being said by following the transcripts in real time.
Ava is awesome to see what people say. With one tap, I invite people, and they join me with their phones.
In 2013, I went to study as part of my master's degree over in Berkeley. And pretty quickly, I actually got involved in the startup ecosystem there, which was not necessarily my intention, to be honest. I was taking a class, social entrepreneurship, where Thibaut was also in that class. And we both also went to Startup Weekend, and Thibaut pitched then the story of his parents and his sister, and the fact that he wanted to use technology to solve some of the communication barriers for them. And I was really intrigued by his pitch and his story, and I was like, wow, I'd love to embark on this. When you join these accelerators or incubators, many of them have a deal for you where basically they give you capital and in exchange for equity or like a stake in the company. And so in this case, we indeed got an investment of like $15,000, I believe, plus the housing and the space. And then we had to sort of give away equity for that. And so relatively speaking, if you then look at how much money you raise in later rounds of the company, you give in the very early beginning, in the early stages, you give away a lot of equity for the money you actually get for it, the cash. And so, but at the time, I would say that, you know, we just came out of school, we just came out of the university, and we had nothing. So for us, it was really important to have that little bit of capital. Yeah, we raised $43,000. It was actually a really good thing for us to do because, one, it was a way to test if there was really this need that we thought there was and if people were ready to pay for it. And so our crowdfunding campaign was a lot of pre-sales. And so people were essentially buying either a beta version of the product or the actual product for maybe a year or a lifetime subscription. And it allowed us to take that and go to our investors and say like, hey, you know, people are ready to pay for it. We raised this much money just based on pre-sales. And so that was a really good proof point. So when you're first-time founders and you're still young and you don't have a lot of, you know, connections and roots here in the Silicon Valley, it may be difficult to actually get in touch and sort of get a hang of like how it works when raising VC money. So it took us a while. Like it took us about 6 months before we raised like that amount of money. But once you understand how it works, then it's actually not that difficult. And it's also the case that once you sort of get your foot in the door and start talking to enough parties and enough people, they start connecting you. It's really a matter of like, can you become the hot girl in the room, right? So are you able to put yourself in a position and have people speak and talk about you among themselves and each other, where you are now becoming like this hot startup that everyone wants to invest in. In the very beginning, we got only no's. So we talked to so many investors before we actually started to get traction and to get them to put money in. But once we had figured it out, within 3 weeks, we were completely oversubscribed. So we ended up saying no to a lot of money. Just because they all started to look at each other and be like, hey, this is an interesting one. Expenses are very high. So like if you want to have an office in San Francisco for yourself, you're going to pay a premium. And I think one of the nice things about the space here, Runway, is that there's a very good vibe of startups around you and interaction with founders and other startups. So it's an open co-working space, so everyone is always, collaborating, but also meeting up over happy hours or breakfast or things. And so like you can easily ask questions or help one another. And I think that's one of the great perks about being in this co-working space. There's so much capital here that you can really rapidly raise and grow your company. And then one other thing I think is really interesting is that you have a lot of these startup literature, like the books, like the Lean Startup and all those pretty famous startup literature. The people who write those books, they walk around in the Silicon Valley. Right, so beyond capital, the people who've done, have run serial like companies successfully, they're here as well, and so they become your mentors or they become your advisors, or even investors. And so I think that's a huge advantage as well, because you have this sort of culture of reinvesting. So like the people who get it, like say, you have some startup and they get acquired by Facebook or Google or one of the big companies, and now these people have a lot of capital. They reinvest in the Silicon Valley and in companies. They become angel investors. And so there's this constant cycle of giving back that's happening, which is extremely favorable for young founders and entrepreneurs. If we're trying to recruit people and we're competing with Google and Facebook and all these big companies, their offers, their salaries are 2 or 3 times as high as what we can offer to developers, for example. And so it becomes much harder to actually recruit talent, right? Because all the talent's being recruited by the big companies. And the expenses of like your office space or like any expenses you have here are through the roof. They're extremely high. And so those are things that make it a lot harder and maybe reasons to not come to the Silicon Valley and start a business here. So if you come over here as a Dutch founder entrepreneur and you want to raise capital in the Silicon Valley, you very clearly need to have an anchor point. You have to have either a very clear idea of how you're going to develop your business in the Silicon Valley or beyond, so in the United States, and open up an office, or you should already have some anchor point. And if you don't have that, it's going to be very difficult for you to raise money here, because they don't typically just give you a bunch of money and you go back to the Netherlands and start using your money there, right? Like that's not how it works. Like as Dutch entrepreneurs and just in general, I think we forget to really make things look a little bigger than they are. And so if you look at Silicon Valley and the culture of that money, that all the capital that's out here, and the way that VCs are investing in companies, you have to kind of oversell yourself. It's like fake it until you make it, right? That sort of mindset it really applies here, because if I want to raise money from VCs, I need to be the next billion-dollar company. I need to be the next Facebook or WhatsApp. And I think that is something that typically Dutch founders don't really have that mindset. They come in and they'll be like, they have amazing products and amazing innovation and technology, but they are so realistic about it and so slow steps, or they think too small, basically. And it's really think big, and that's going to help you so much to raise capital here.